All right, guys, welcome to another Andrew Goes Outside episode, Nature Walk Reviews. For this one, we're going to do the new, relatively new, Thieaudio tribrid IEMs. In my right hand, we have the Excalibur. You can see it here. They look the same, but they have the printing on the back, so you can tell which is which. In my left hand, we have the Oracle. And these both come in at around $530, $540. In this video, I wanted to touch on a subject that I think it's worth bringing up because I think both of these IEMs, and in fact, not just these two, but a number of IEMs that are these tribrid designs that are coming out, you know, at around this price point, they're sort of demonstrating this to me. And it's the question of, are we doing things because we should, or are we doing things because we can? I think there's a bigger question to be asked here about, you know, whether or not everything should be tuned to the same target or whether everything should be tuned the same, to which I think the answer is very obviously no, but it's also not like, you know, saying, you know, you can have whatever flavor you want and it doesn't really matter. There's definitely better and worse, but you can have different versions of better and worse. It's not just all one, you know, specific thing that everything has to shoot for. But that's a subject for another time. At the moment, I'm kind of focused on this question of, you know, why tribrids? And I think, I'm not saying that in a, you know, you shouldn't be doing tribrids, we shouldn't be doing tribrids. I think tribrids are really cool. And if anybody's wondering what a tribrid is, that is when you have three different driver types. That's hard to say. You have a dynamic driver to handle the bass frequencies, you have some series of balanced armatures in the mids, and then you have some E-stats, at least the IEM version of E-stats, in the highs. And so far, people, myself included, have had mixed opinions, mixed feelings about these E-stat drivers in the highs. And I think the question that comes to mind when I see the kind of the landscape of these, you know, mid-price, like 500-ish, you know, $500-ish price tag IEMs that are coming out is, why are we making them tribrids? And I think in some ways, at least so far, it's been because we can do that, not necessarily because we should do that. Not because it's particularly better than, you know, just going with the multi-BA or hybrid setup. And again, that's not to say that we won't come out with something awesome, but we've seen this from a number of different companies who are all, you know, doing very competitive stuff. We've seen Dunu do that with the EST112. We've seen, you know, these two obviously. We've seen the variations from Moondrop just recently come out, which I hope to evaluate soon. And I think there's some other companies who are doing it as well. So this seems to be the trend. And Thieaudio, they're well known for having really well-tuned stuff. One of my favorites is the Clairvoyance. Another favorite is the Monarch. And both of those are particularly huge. They come in at a more expensive price tag. And with these two, you get a little bit more of a more modest shell, a little bit smaller, a little more comfortable. And I think they've done a good job here with the look and the design. It's a very similar design to what you get with the Clairvoyance. It just in a more comfortable form factor, slightly smaller and more comfortable package. I think that's great. Wow, the sun just came out. You know, I'd actually already walked this and I had my big camera out and I was gonna do some filming and it was gonna be glorious with B-roll, and then I got attacked by horseflies because I was stationary. And so I figure the solution is to just keep moving. Don't stay in one spot for any length of time because the horseflies will get you. I'm a horse, that's the moral of this story. But let's just begin by talking about the Thieaudio Oracle right here. Sorry, this is the Excalibur. Let's talk about the Thieaudio Oracle. Are they the same? Yeah, the same. The Oracle, you can tell from the back. And the Oracle, just like the Clairvoyance, is one of the best tuned IEMs, period. With one exception, and it's in the treble, but let's get there. With the bass, you have somewhat of a bass boost, but let's call it a neutral IEM with just a little bit of a bass shelf there in a really tastefully done way. You know, again, you also have that dynamic driver in the bass to be able to give you that extra sense of dynamic impact and punch and slam and macro contrast that I love, and it definitely delivers on that front as well. So it might not be super bass boosted like the Monarch, but it definitely is satisfying. Oh my goodness, see, that's what I'm talking about, these horseflies, Jesus. But where I think it trips up just a tiny little bit is in the treble. Now what they've done here with their driver configuration is they've done a single dynamic driver for the bass, they've done 2 balanced armatures for the mids, and then 2 E-stats for the highs. And I kind of think that they should have maybe not gone with 2 E-stats for the highs, because in the upper treble, it's just a little bit boosted there for my liking. And I think actually that's going to depend a little bit on genre and a little bit on age of the listener. And again, it's mostly perfect with this. I mean, the folks who tune this stuff, they really know what they're doing. And yeah, they've basically nailed it here with the Oracle. Probably one of the best tuned IEMs, period. And certainly one of the best tuned IEMs at this price point, just with a tiny bit too much upper treble air for my liking. But I think this is also going to come down to the person, how, like the listener's age, and also, you know, genre preferences and things like that. Like, don't misunderstand me here. This is not, you know, fatiguing for the consonant range, or it's not sibilant or anything like that. It's in that sort of upper shimmery edge, kind of the splash and sizzle quality that's just a little bit pronounced there. Now, the key thing here, though, is that, again, this is using that tribrid design. And the reason why I'm asking this question of why tribrid at this price point is that the technical performance of this is not as nice in the treble where those E-stat drivers show up as I would have liked. And that's not to say that it's bad, it's just that it has that particular E-stat timbre that is more noticeable because it's a little bit elevated there. You know, for the rest of it, with the bass, you get really good dynamic contrast and impact because of that dynamic driver. With the mids, you get really good detail from those BAs. And in the highs, I'm kind of left feeling like yes, there is detail there, and yes, you know, you do hear more as a result of a slight pronouncement there in the upper treble, but the criticism of those E-stat drivers in the treble is definitely real. And for anybody who's unaware of what that criticism is, I like to describe it as a kind of like flatness, or almost like kind of like a compressed kind of sound, or a limpness to it that lacks the sort of grip and tactility that you might get from like a tubeless design BA. Of course, I'm not suggesting that that will be something we do at this price point, but when you do hear those, you realize, oh yeah, there's lots to be gained there. And I don't think this is the most technically impressive IEM at this price point because of that E-stat timbre. Again, I'm not saying this is like missing out on separation or detail or all that kind of stuff, or dynamics. It's totally fine for all that. It's just that that E-stat timbre comes through a little bit more strongly on this, as it does on the Dunu EST112, as it does on, you know, maybe not to the same degree as that Tribrid Starlight that I evaluated a while ago, but because that was using 4 of them. But like when you use more of those drivers, and when those drivers have more of an impact in the overall frequency response, they're, you know, being tokened more frequently by your music, you do start to hear that a little bit more. And this is not, I'm not going to say this is an example of that E-stat driver at its best, okay? It's not as bad as the Thieaudio Starlight there for it, and I've certainly heard worse, but it's also not the greatest. So that's kind of the only criticism I can give to this IEM, the Oracle. It is, apart from that, one of the most spectacular IEMs in this price point, and definitely the one at that price point that, at least for a neutral kind of tuning, that I think other IEMs should be measured against. Now, the question there is, would I take this over the Dunu SA6? And I think for a more neutral presentation, I think the answer is actually yes. Yes, I would. However, there's something about that tuning of the SA6 and the U12T from 64 Audio that, if anybody's unaware, they have a very similar tuning there that I just love. And so I would have a hard time kind of, you know, giving that up, I guess. And remember, the SA6 is just all BAs. So again, I'm left thinking, you know, why tribrid? You know, the Dunu SA6, it's got fantastic detail there. I mean, yeah, it'd be nice if it had a dynamic driver in the bass, but even still, it's pretty good for multi-BA. And, you know, you have then these coming out at a similar price. Yes, the tuning here is technically better. It is more neutral, you know, better. And that earlier question, that sort of supervening question about should everything be tuned to the same target, my answer is no, for precisely this reason. You know, comparing the Oracle here against the SA6 demonstrates that you can have different ways of doing a tuning and have them both be good. So that basically sums up my feelings about the Oracle. It's fantastic tuning, and, you know, almost everything is solid about it except for that E-stat timbre in the treble. And that's the only thing that to me just makes me ask that question. You know, are we doing things because we should or because we can? And this to me seems like an example of, well, we can do this. And it probably, you know, people who love the story about E-stats and different driver types, they're gonna probably, you know, flock to this kind of thing, and they should. Certainly better than the Dunu EST112 for the overall balance, and certainly one of the better IEMs in this price bracket. Now, with the Excalibur, let's move on to that one. This is essentially the same thing as the Oracle. So very, very similar for its technical performance. It still has that ESTAT timbre there in the treble, but this one is a little bit more V-shaped. So you get a little bit, whoa. So you get a little bit more bass here, and you get a little bit more treble. And thankfully the treble is reasonably well balanced for all of it. It's not like you have, you know, massive harmonic imbalances or peaks and things like that. It's mostly solid there, just boosted. And I know a lot of people like that kind of tuning. This is the one I definitely wouldn't take over the SA6. You know, the SA6 is that version of relaxed and fun and warm and bass boosted that I love. This one is much more of a, I'm just gonna call it a traditional V-shape kind of sound with just boosted bass and boosted treble. I just don't think this is as good as what you get with the Oracle overall. And so, you know, with the Oracle, I could see an argument saying, you know, I would take this over the SA6. I can absolutely see that. With the Excalibur, I kind of have a hard time with that, just because, you know, you get the downside of that ESTAT timbre, and then also it's not as relaxed there overall as the SA6 is. And so, yeah, this one for me, it's not a miss necessarily, it's just not as competitive and not as awesome as the Oracle. Now, I've just stopped to grab another IEM out of my backpack here, and it's one that I think we should be talking about. Not many people are talking about it, but it's another one that makes this question that I've been asking all along. You guys are probably tired of it. Why tribrid at this price point? Because it's a strictly balanced armature IEM. I think it uses 8, and it is the Kiwi Ears Orchestra. Now, I've been, you know, talking about this a little bit online on Twitter and social media and stuff, and I really think this is something that people should be talking more about. This costs around $500. What's been done here with the Kiwi Ears Orchestra is you have basically a slightly more neutral alternative to the Dunu SA6. You know, with the Dunu SA6, it's relaxed, it's versatile, it's a little bass boosted, and it's got great, you know, detail and technical performance and separation. And then the Kiwi Ears Orchestra comes along and says, let's do that and just make it a little bit more neutral. So this is also relaxed sounding for the upper mids. It's, you know, bass elevated, but not with a very distinct sub bass shelf. So, and it's also not as bass elevated as the SA6, and also not as elevated as the Excalibur. But with this one, you kind of have like a very interesting downward slope there for the bass, and it gives you a little bit more richness and body of tone there for the lower mids, which I kind of like. But, you know, I can see merits to both, you know, whether it's a distinct sub bass shelf or whether it's this more kind of gradual downward sloping thing. But then at around 3K, this is relaxed in favor of 4, 5, and 6K. Now, to me, that has the effect of making this less good for certain genres and more good for others. I find that, you know, for my jazz tracks and, you know, acoustic music and stuff like that, this is phenomenally good. You get a lot of the clarity there without any shout or honk to it. Yeah, I wouldn't really say this is ideal for, you know, rock and metal and aggressive music, because it can have a tendency to have a little bit of clang to it as a result of the of that sort of 4, 5, 6K presence. It's not like that region is boosted just because it's not as filled in there at around 3K. You do get that sort of like upper edge effect there for certain harmonics. And then the rest of the treble is totally smooth and well balanced. So there's nothing fatiguing there whatsoever. I think if I had one criticism here, I think actually almost that the rest of the treble could be a little more elevated to kind of compensate for that clang a little bit, but man, is this ever well tuned. And this yet again demonstrates that you can have multiple different tunings that are very clever and very well done, very well balanced, you know, that aren't the same as one another. And so, you know, we don't necessarily just need to point at one target and say, this is good, this is perfect sound. There are so many different ways of doing good sound. You know, we have the Oracle on the one hand doing something amazing with its overall tonal balance, and this is the one that I would say is the more, you know, technically neutral. And then you have the Kiwi Ears Orchestra, which is impeccably well tuned, that has just a slight hint of flavor there and character, At the same time, I'm actually going to give the detail edge to the Kiwi Ears Orchestra over the Thieaudio Oracle. Which one would I prefer? Yeah, I'd probably go with the Oracle just because I think it is a little bit more well balanced overall. But there are things that I like about the Kiwi Ears Orchestra more, and it is in its technical performance. And again, I think in some ways the Kiwi Ears Orchestra is yet another alternative to the new SA6 at around that price. So where I once had a very clear, obvious winner or go-to pick in that $500 to $550 price range, there are now three that I have a hard time choosing between. For the most neutral, it's the Oracle. For the most relaxed, fun, easygoing, versatile presentation, it's the Dunu SA6. And for somewhere in between, it's the Kiwi Ears Orchestra with perhaps the best technical performance out of all of them. So I hope to soon get a chance to listen to the Moondrop variations, because I'm hopeful that that's going to sort of answer that question for me, why tribrid. I hope to come to a conclusion about that one and go, this is why tribrid. This is why we go with those E-stats and the treble, not just because it looks good on a box, but because it actually has merits in sound quality. Because at the moment, for technical performance, for detail, for incisiveness, for separation, for speed, and all those things except for maybe dynamics and macro contrast, these multi-BAs still, I think, do a better job than the E-stat implementations. That's just my take. I mean, maybe you have a different opinion, and I'd love to talk to an engineer at some point as to why they're doing this and why the trend seems to be tribrid. Because for me, it's not obvious. It's not an obvious reason. So I'm hopeful that the variations kind of demonstrates that to me. Maybe it's the case that adding those E-stats for the highs allows for different kinds of implementations of BAs in the mid that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do, and then it gets a little bit complicated. But at the moment, if I'm talking strictly technical performance, it's going to be something like this, the Kiwi Ears Orchestra, in that price point. Even though for let's say hardcore critical listening, serious audiophile listening, the Oracle is probably the one that I would gravitate more towards. And then again, for me, just having a good time, the way I would use IEMs, I'd probably still end up going with the Dunu SA6. Which, yeah, what have we learned? We've learned nothing. That's the moral of this story. We've learned nothing. So I've come to the end of the road here. This was a shorter hike than I was expecting, but that's okay. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Let me know if any of this makes sense, or if you see the whole push for tribrids in the same way that I do, where I'm not totally convinced as to the real merits there of that E-stat driver in the highs. But that's going to do it for this video, and I'm going to see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.